The Living Tribunal is finally coming to Marvel Snap. It has been data mined for almost a year with the same effect but slightly different stat line. I believe it actually originally started as a 6-2, became a 6-4, and is now a 6-6. It has the ability of ongoing split your total power evenly among all locations. Now, as you probably know, in Marvel Snap, you're trying to win 2 out of 3 locations. So it doesn't always help if you split all of your power across the board. But maybe there's a few decks that can make it work. So in this video, I'm going to go over the mechanics of this card because there are a few nuances that we have to understand before we drop those 6K tokens, because that is not cheap. And also I'm going to go over some synergistic cards, a few decks that I have in mind, and as well as some counters. I have to say though, right off the hop, that I find it a bit funny that this card is finally being released, but it's being released a week after, not even a week after, the most anticipated card I have ever seen in Marvel Snap, and that is High Evolutionary. So I feel like the Living Tribunal is just living in the High Evolutionary shadow, and it's kind of sad. A lot of people are probably spending their tokens on High Evo and are going to pass on Living Tribunal. Rightfully so. I think this ends up being a bit of a meme card, not very strong card, but a pretty fun card. That's what I'm hoping for anyways, but let's get to the mechanics. All right, so these are a few pieces of information that have been confirmed by the devs. I will post their Discord responses on the screen here. But firstly, how does it work when, there's a tie in power or there's a decimal point, right? So just think of it this way, okay? So it's going to round down if you have 1 extra power. So what if your total power that you have on the board equals 31? Well, it's going to round down. You're going to lose a point of power. It's going to go to 30, which is going to evenly give 10 at each location, okay? But let's say you're at 32 points of power. Well, you're going to get a bonus power. It's going to ramp up, or it's going to round up to 33, giving you 11 at each location. Okay, so that's how the rounding works. It's not always up, it's not always down. It depends on how close you are to those thresholds. Okay, so also locations are not going to count that fractional amount of power. So just because, let's say you had, 31 and it ended up being 10 at each location, but let's say your opponent had 10 on the other side of that location, you end up in a tie. Well, it's not going to say, well, that 1 bit of power that you lost because we split it evenly gives you that 0.33 advantage over your opponent's 10 power. That does not work. It's going to just set it at 10 and that location will be a tie. And lastly, I've seen a lot of people ask this question. No, Living Tribunal will not be a big bad card. It will eventually rotate down in series. High Evolutionary, on the other hand, was a big bad. I imagine they wanted to make them both big bads, but they could only pick 1 for the month. 2 would just be too much, too expensive, right? So they ended up going with High Evo, and Living Tribunal will eventually rotate down. All right, so a few of the pros that I see with this card. Okay, so there is a tall versus wide gameplay in Marvel Snap, right? Wide is where you're kind of trying to give a lot of power across the board to win 2 out of 3 locations. There's cards like Dr. Doom that plays wide. It gives 5, 5, and 5. This kind of does both, but your gameplay, what you're focusing on is 1 location. There's a few other ways you could play this, but the way I envision it is with like some Iron Man combos. You just stack a lot of power at 1 location so that Living Tribunal is able to distribute it to the others. So that creates a tall gameplay state, which can be really fun. You're looking for like a 4-card combo at 1 location to win you the game, get you crazy amounts of power. I think that's pretty interesting. We don't have that too much. The only existing combo that I can really think of that really builds towards being tall is where you play like Omega Red with Iron Man Onslaught, that kind of thing. And Living Tribunal kind of fits into that, a little bit more expensive, but can get crazier amounts of power that Omega Red could never get. The other thing is that it's almost guaranteed that it's going to win you 1 lane, Almost, but like your opponent's probably not trying to win all three. So one location's going to be up for grabs, and then you just get a lot of power out there. So that's kind of nice, but we're going to get to the downside to that in a second. It extends power to unplayable locations. I actually think this is one of the greatest strengths of the Living Tribunal. There's a lot of times where there's like Sanctum Sanctorum out, or a lot of those locations that don't allow you to play cards there. Well, one of the best ways to work around that is to just throw out tokens. So like Dr. Doom or White Tiger, you put tokens over there because you can play those cards elsewhere, and then they generate at the difficult locations. Well, Living Tribunal doesn't even need to do that. He's going to evenly distribute that power, and then bam, you're probably going to have way more than any tokens could ever generate over there. So that's pretty nice. And you can even manipulate the locations with things like Storm or Professor X to really help you, give you that boost. And another thing about this card is that I think everyone is going to be token broke because everyone just dropped 6k tokens that they've probably been saving up for a very long time on High Evolutionary. Rightfully so. That card is clearly viable in a lot of decks and is super, super fun. This is more memey. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that powerful. It has a lot of counters as well, but it will surprise people. Because it's kind of like that Galactus effect. When not a lot of people had Galactus, you wouldn't think to counter it. You wouldn't think it was going to be dropped on that final turn or anything like that, right? So you would end up stealing a couple cubes as the Galactus player. Now people kind of understand that that's a thing and they have to be aware of it. I feel like Living Tribunal, like maybe a little bit after it's released, but after that, like, are you really going to be thinking, oh, they might distribute their power? And I don't think the decks are going to be built in such a way that it's going to be so easily predictable compared to Galactus. So I think the surprise factor is actually there and helps out the Living Tribunal. But we got to get to the cons because there are so many. Okay, so Galactus. I'm going to get into the counters in a second, but I just have to talk about Galactus because it absolutely ruins this card. This card wants 3 locations. Galactus eats them all up. So if there's only 1 location on the board, Living Tribunal is not doing jack all. He's just giving you 6 power. So that is really, really bad. In most games, it will be a struggle to get over 20 power per location. That is a real difficult thing. So to get 20 to each location, you would have to get 60 at 1 location. That's not easy to do. Even with some Iron Man Onslaught combos, it's not all that easy. You'd have to get some decent rolls on your location, something like Onslaught Citadel. Even Mojo World could be pretty good if you make sure that your opponent doesn't play 4 cards there. So there's a few ways to get there, to get those crazy power totals, but you really need the right draws. And whenever there's a card like that, and especially when it's your finisher, the inconsistency is a real problem. So I feel like that's what's going to happen with the Living Tribunal because it requires so much support. Did you draw your Iron Man? If you never drew it, you're in a bad spot. Maybe you do like a Mr. Negative thing. At one point in time when this was, I believe it was a 6-2 at one point in time, Mr. Negative seemed like a legit deck. You put with your Iron Man, your Living Tribunal, and all kinds of other crazy things, maybe even like Arnim Zola to destroy the Iron Mans, anything like that, right? But because that doesn't exist anymore and this card has 6 power, I don't know if that package is going to work as well as you'd hope. So it ends up just feeling like you really need those important draws or else it's boom or bust with this card. And lastly, I'm going to say this every time there is a new release card because I really want it to change. This card costs 6,000 tokens. I don't think it's going to be that card that's going to bring you to infinite. It might do better than I think it will. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But if you want to spend 6,000 tokens on a card that's strong, fun, and got a lot of deck opportunities, well then High Evolutionary is probably the card for you. But Living Tribunal, hey, if you got the tokens, you really like the effect, you want to play with this card, go for it. But it is expensive. Okay, so really quickly, I wanted to talk about the counters. So we already talked about Galactus, absolutely brutal, ruins Living Tribunal. Those two are always going to be angry at each other. But actually Galactus, I guess, doesn't really care about what Living Tribunal is doing. Enchantress, on the other hand, is pretty nasty as well. The Living Tribunal does have an ongoing tag. Its original datamine, I believe, didn't. So it can actually be countered by Enchantress. And I think a very viable way of playing the Living Tribunal is cheating it out early. Because you want to like find, I don't know, another 6-drop to play or get a lot of power out on that last turn rather than spending your turn 6 on Living Tribunal. But that puts it up for risk of being countered by Enchantress. Even Rogue would be a little bit weird because your opponent might not be able to handle the Living Tribunal's ongoing effect, but it's a counter and it could hurt. Captain Marvel's another one because the Living Tribunal, its effect doesn't happen at the end of the game. It's an ongoing effect. So Captain Marvel can, at the end of the game, look at the way the power was distributed and decide of where to win. And that's kind of nasty. Hobgoblin's pretty bad. Obviously, negative power. That's going to hurt your total power output. And then you're giving out lower amounts of power across all three locations. Infinite. I put Infinite here because I feel like just high power cards in general are going to be really difficult for this kind of deck because, like I said, you need 60 at a single location to get 20 across the board. So like the Infinite's just 20 on his own, right? You do like the She-Hulk magic combo, whatever. Like that could be really nasty. It's not necessarily a direct counter, but I just wanted to emphasize that a lot of decks, a lot of other cards can get big power totals just on their own right, whereas Living Tribunal needs all that support. And another one is Kang. If you play the Living Tribunal on turn 6 and they Kang and they see that's what you're going to do, they can just do the math and win the game. And then you probably don't have a backup option. So I feel like that's pretty well checkmate. And I'm sure I'm missing quite a few various counters. I mean, there's a bunch of locations that could counter this card. There's a bunch of locations that could help this card. So it's really interesting. It's a real back and forth for me. Whenever there's a 6 drop, it's really got to have a powerful effect, in my opinion. I almost wish, maybe it'd be way too nuts, but I almost wish this was 9 power. You know, just that extra bit of power. Because right now, Living Tribunal, literally on his own, if he's the only card out there, is Mr. Fantastic, but costs 3 more energy because he's giving 2 to each location. So sometimes I wish it was just like a little bit more power, you know, like a 6-9 stat line or even 6-12. Maybe that'd be bonkers. I don't know. But anyways, let's get into some decks that I was thinking about and some synergistic cards. All right, so some key synergies. Iron Man's a no-brainer. Like Iron Man gets you to those crazy places with a lot of power, and that's going to help distribute it across the other locations. Wave to cheat out the Tribunal, or another big power card that's going to help you later on. A very nice combination. Invisible Woman actually seems really nice because it protects you from that Enchantress. So you can play Invisible Woman and then play your Iron Man and your Tribunal or whatever else you got to do. And if Enchantress comes out, she's going to hit Invisible Woman. So she'll take the hit from that and you'll be okay afterwards. And also she got buffed to 3 power, so that helps a little bit. And then the location, you know, restricting cards like Storm and Professor X, I think are going to help a lot. You kind of just throw those out there to ruin your opponent's chance of getting power there so that the Living Tribunal could maybe stack, win its location, give a lot of power elsewhere to those other ones. If you can Storm and Professor X, even in a losing scenario, you just straight up throw out that Professor X. You're losing by like 10 power. It doesn't matter at that point. You throw these cards out, your opponents can't play there, and then you Living Tribunal that distributes it across the board. That's how I was kind of thinking that could work out. And that's where I got these 3 decks. So first up, we have Ramp Tribunal. So the idea behind this is just to slowly ramp up into a 4-card combination being Invisible Woman, Iron Man, Onslaught, Living Tribunal. You play all 4 of those at the same location. You put those all at the same location, and then that gives you 16 power, but Iron Man's going to double that, right? So that's going to go to 32 power, and then Onslaught's going to double it again and bring that to 64, which gets distributed across 3 locations, which, because we know it's going to round down, is going to be 31 at each location. Boom. 31 power across the board. Not too shabby. Can probably beat most decks. So I feel like that would work. But of course, we need all those cards. I have Mystique in there as another option in case we don't get Onslaught and we just use Mystique on the Iron Man or something along those lines. But again, we need to ramp. You have to ramp with this. So we got the Electro, the Wave, the Sandman to slow down my opponents so they can maybe do less things as well. I got Storm to lock up locations. Ebony Maw to just throw out there because why not? He's a lot of power for 1 cost. And then Nebula, she can get to crazy power totals. And Cosmo, strictly to counter Galactus. That's what you hold that little doggo for. All right, and then next we got Living and Dying. So one of the cool things about Living Tribunal is I could actually see it kind of just going in a few decks that get to high power totals, and Destroy can get to some pretty crazy high power totals, right? So especially with Deadpool, right? So you destroy Deadpool a whole bunch of times, you get him to like 10, 12 power. I was even thinking throwing Shuri in there so that on turn 5, maybe you Shuri and you Deadpool, and then you have a crazy Deadpool out there, or maybe even Shuri Arcturian Death, if she is free, right? That's a pretty decent amount of power. And then you play Living Tribunal at the end to distribute that wherever you need to go. Sometimes you get in a sticky situation with Destroy decks where your opponent plays armor. And then you need to figure out, you can't really start playing things there and destroy them on repeat, your Deadpool or whatever. So you kind of end up stuck in 1 or 2 lanes. Well, this kind of helps you, get across to 3. So maybe it works out that way. And lastly, just a control deck. This leans more heavily into not letting your opponent play anything. I don't think the power is necessarily there for this kind of deck. I just wanted to emphasize a few combinations, specifically like the Green Goblin or even Hobgoblin. Cards that can get negative power out to your opponent's side is really going to help. If you can make sure that your opponent is going to lose 1 location for sure, and then you make it really hard to play cards at another location, then you're in a pretty good spot, right? I guess that goes just for any deck, so you don't really need Living Tribunal. But the idea was like, if I throw out a couple goblins, I storm, and then I Spider-Man a location on turn 5, and then I play Living Tribunal or Professor X or whatever it is, that might help us out. But I don't know about that one per se, but the other 2 I could definitely see working. But again, it just feels like a card that just might not work. So I'm not too sure. I haven't picked up High Evolutionary. I've been away for the last week. So I've been really kind of like debating between this card or High Evo. They both look really fun to me. I want to try them both out, but they're expensive, guys. 6,000 tokens is no joke. And until they change the economy to make these more affordable, I think this one's a pass. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you probably pass on this card, as exciting as it looks. It could be a game changer. Now you have to start thinking about Galactus. You got to start thinking about Living Tribunal. It'll have a surprise factor, but that's might be as far as it goes. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.